History often teaches us that wars end with signatures on surrender documents, with ruined cities photographed from the air, with defeated armies marching into captivity. These are the endings we remember, visible, dramatic, undeniable. But some of the most decisive moments of war never happen on battlefields. They happen inside private homes, behind closed doors, in whispered conversations, in the final minutes of a man's life. This is not the story of a victory or a defeat. It is the story of an execution disguised as honor, and of a boy forced to carry the truth through silence, captivity, and time itself. On October 14, 1944, the Third Reich did not lose a general to enemy fire. It erased one of its own, and in doing so, it turned a 15-year-old boy into a living witness to a lie that would echo for generations. On the morning of October 14, 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, Germany's most celebrated military commander, the so-called Desert Fox, told his teenage son Manfred that he had 15 minutes left to live. Not because of his wounds, not because of the war, but because Adolf Hitler had decided he was too dangerous to remain alive. Two generals arrived at Rommel's home in Herrlingen shortly before noon, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Mazel. They were not there to check on his health. They carried an ultimatum from Hitler himself. Rommel had been accused of high treason. The charge was political, not legal. After the failed July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler, the regime had entered a phase of internal terror. Anyone even loosely connected to the conspirators became suspect. Rommel had known several of them. Whether he actively participated remains debated to this day. But debate did not matter. Under the Third Reich, judgment was absolute. The choice presented to Rommel was brutally simple. He could swallow a cyanide capsule. His death would be announced as the result of complications from earlier injuries. He would receive a state funeral. His family would be spared. Their pensions would remain intact. Or he could refuse. In that case, he would be dragged before the People's Court, publicly humiliated, tortured, and executed. His wife and son would be arrested. His name would be erased in disgrace. This was not mercy. It was coercion. Rommel was still recovering from catastrophic head injuries sustained 3 months earlier, when Allied aircraft strafed his staff car. He walked with difficulty. One eye no longer closed properly. Survival itself had become suspicious. At 12:15 p.m., Rommel told his son Manfred that he would be dead within 15 minutes. Outside, Gestapo agents waited in the woods surrounding the villa. Escape was impossible. Resistance meant immediate execution. Rommel explained that dying at the hands of one's own country was harder than any battlefield death. Then he dressed carefully. He put on his Afrika Korps jacket. He took his field marshal's baton. He said goodbye to his wife, Lucie, and then to his son. Manfred would later remember his father's calm, not resignation, but clarity. Rommel understood that the regime had already decided. The cyanide was theater, a performance designed to protect the state's image. He entered the car with Burgdorf and Mazel. They drove only a short distance. At 12:35 p.m., the telephone rang at the villa. Erwin Rommel was dead. The official cause, a cerebral embolism. The truth would remain buried for now. For days later, tens of thousands lined the streets of Ulm. The Nazi regime staged one of the most elaborate funerals of the war. Rommel's coffin was draped in the swastika flag. Military bands played. Senior commanders saluted. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt delivered the eulogy, praising Rommel's loyalty to Hitler and the fatherland. Every word was false. The regime honored a man it had just forced to kill himself, praised his loyalty after accusing him of treason. It buried him with full honors while his body still carried the poison they had made him swallow. Lucie and Manfred stood among the mourners, knowing the truth and saying nothing. Not from cowardice, from survival. Rommel had taken the poison so they would not die with him. 6 months later, the Third Reich was collapsing. In April 1945, French forces swept into southwestern Germany. Manfred, now 16, had been conscripted into the Reich labor service. As Allied troops advanced, he deserted. He was captured anyway, processed as a prisoner of war, interrogated like thousands of other German boys, until his name surfaced. Manfred Rommel, the son of the Desert Fox. General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny, commander of the French First Army, requested to see him personally. He had faced Rommel in North Africa. He respected him as an enemy commander, and now wanted the truth. Manfred could have stayed silent. He could have repeated the official story. Instead, he spoke. He described the generals arriving at noon, the ultimatum, the 15 minutes, the Gestapo waiting outside, the phone call confirming death. His testimony became one of the earliest credible accounts proving that the Nazi regime coerced suicides among its own officers. A teenage voice carried more weight than any intelligence document. One truth remained buried for decades. In 2001, a Sunday Times investigation uncovered personal letters revealing that Rommel had fathered a daughter in 1913, long before his marriage. Her name was Gertrude. Her mother, Walburga Stemmer, was a fruit seller. Rommel proposed marriage, but his family objected. She was deemed unsuitable for an ambitious officer. The relationship ended. The child did not. Gertrude was quietly acknowledged, introduced to relatives as a cousin. She visited Lucie and Manfred throughout her life. She lived connected but unseen. Walburga died in 1928, officially from pneumonia. Historians later suspected suicide. Despair, isolation, and abandonment had likely taken their toll. The revelation did not destroy Rommel's image, but it complicated it. Lucie Rommel survived her husband by 27 years. She lived through occupation, denazification, division, and Germany's painful reckoning with its past. She never wrote memoirs, never toured lecture halls, never defended the regime. Her silence was not denial. It was strategy. To speak would have meant justifying, explaining, becoming spectacle. Lucie refused. She raised her son. She endured. She died in 1971, dignified, restrained, unbroken. Manfred Rommel could have vanished, changed his name, left Germany, escaped the shadow. He chose the opposite. In 1974, he ran for mayor of Stuttgart and won. He would hold the office for 22 years. But he did not use his name to glorify the past. He used it to repudiate it. He championed immigrant integration, promoted reconciliation, tolerated dissent. Then came 1977. After members of the Red Army faction died in prison, no cemetery would accept their bodies. The nation refused burial. Manfred authorized it. The backlash was furious. His response was simple. Reconciliation requires acts of reconciliation. In 2014, Stuttgart renamed its airport, not after Erwin Rommel, but after Manfred Rommel, the son, the witness. The inversion was complete. A name once tied to conquest now represented tolerance. Manfred died in 2013. He proved that inheritance does not dictate destiny. Choice does. What happened to the Rommel family after the war was not collapse, nor disgrace, nor erasure. It was transformation. A transformation forced into existence on an autumn afternoon in 1944, when a 15-year-old boy was told that his father would be dead within minutes, not because of enemy fire, but because the state he served had decided he was no longer useful alive. That moment did not end with a funeral or a lie printed in newspapers. It followed that boy for the rest of his life. Manfred Rommel grew up carrying a truth that could not be spoken, a name that could not be escaped, and a history that, not to redeem the past, but to reject it quietly, deliberately, without spectacle. Where the regime had demanded loyalty, he practiced accountability. Where it ruled through fear, he governed through reconciliation. Where it erased inconvenient truths, he allowed history to remain complicated and unfinished. The Third Reich tried to control how Erwin Rommel would be remembered. It failed. Because in the end, the most lasting judgment did not come from courts, documents, or monuments, but from a son who refused to live as a continuation of what he inherited. The Rommel name survived the war not because it was protected, and not because it was forgiven, but because it was transformed. And that transformation began the moment a boy watched his father die, understood the cost of silence, and decided that history would end with him choosing differently.